All right, Coach D, thank you for taking time this morning to talk through your book, Integrity Switch. Got the chance to read it. First off, awesome book, and thank you for taking the time to write it. Uh, got a bunch of questions for you today. My first question that I kind of wanted to start off with was just tell us the story behind the title, Integrity Switch, and why you decided to name the book Integrity Switch.
Well, it's interesting because I've had the domain name A squared B squared leadership for several years. And then I knew Integrity Switch was going to be chapter 1. So I actually grabbed that domain name. My daughter did that through her marketing business. And up until the last year, the book was going to be called A squared B squared leadership. Because that's an original thing that I never shared with anyone except my daughter. Like it's not out there. It's just nothing's. I mean, it's nothing that unique. But I had come up with that. But then, as I started working with a book designer and Kindle, I had an epiphany one day. Two things happened. I had an epiphany that the little A square with a superscript is not going to work in a URL link. I'm going to have to spell it A-squared. And that's not the look I want. Then one of my readers, I'll leave that person unnamed. One of my readers immediately came back and said, "What are you doing? The name of this book has got to be Integrity Switch." So that's how the name actually started, which is yet again reflective, I hope, of my style, I think, as a leader, of being willing to have trusted advisors or listen to people because I couldn't agree more. But then I had to retweak a lot of things. So that's how I chose that name. But, and I don't know if you want me to get into it, but it's the phrase is described in chapter 1.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear the story directly. I read it. It's an awesome story. I wanted to hear it
All right.
directly from you.
So for whoever's listening, let me set it up so it kind of becomes a nice story. So I was a professor for 20 plus years, and in my last gig at Springfield College, when I stopped coaching, it was because I had an opportunity to stop coaching, stay at the college, and then lean into my career history as a director of athletics back in the 80s at Roger Williams University, and to go after an open position at the college to be the graduate program director for athletic administration. That seemed like a tremendous fit for me because I had, I think, 7 or 8 years. I was an assistant AD and associate AD and then the AD while I was coaching all that time and growing a family. And so when I came to Springfield, I was a teacher coach. And when I left coaching and now I was a full-time professor grad program director, it was the first time in my life, first of all, that I had one job. I had one focused job. Now, the parts of it were advising and teaching and, placing field experience and supervision. But, it was basically, I was out of the dual role. So I had time to really focus and reflect and assess and evaluate my own teaching more than I had probably ever done. And to get right into it, that sets it up. So anyone who's leadership or a parent, any one of us has had the experience of recognizing that the people you're communicating to have their eyes glassed over and you've lost them. Now, if you're a professor and you can't read the room, or if you're a public speaker and you don't read the room, you're probably not going to be highly successful or sought after. So over time, we are required by our teaching contract. There are some things we have to provide a syllabus for our courses, and we must address the students around behavioral expectations, and this is all in the student handbook. And that's not surprising to anyone who's gone through education, especially a college degree. It's that traditional class 1 where the teacher goes through plagiarism, academic honesty, wah, 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 wah.
Everyone's favorite day is syllabus day.
And so but that's not me. That's not how I teach. So I'm sure graduate students who didn't know me until they walked in the door, although most of them met me in the recruiting process or summer advising, but they didn't really know me unless they asked about me, which would have been smart. They walk in day 1 and they're not done in 10 minutes. We have a lesson for day 1. We're introducing the course. We are going right into the material. There's probably an assignment. And if I really wanted to get their attention, it would not be unlike me to walk in and say, okay, hopefully you've prepared for this, but we've got a quiz today. Please take everything off your desk. A quiz? Yeah, well, is it going to count? Of course it's going to count. Well, what are we doing? I said, it's a pretest. It's a pretest. Now this is going to average out really nicely if you pay attention, because we'll have a post test at the end of the year and you'll know what all the questions are. I'm going to give you the same piece of paper. So I want to know what you know about this. People want to walk out the door, whatever. So I would do things like this anyways. But part of it was I just couldn't stand hearing myself. Like, I'm so tired of this same dribble. And now, when it comes to the academic honesty, like any faculty member, I ran into situations where I had to deal with plagiarism and academic dishonesty and maybe deal with some discipline. And it might have been formal. It was rare, but it happens. And at the same time, many times I bumped into something about academic dishonesty. And this particular year, as I was preparing in August, I found a study that said how many college students admit that they cheat. And it was 86%. I think that's the one that, right? And I was just furious. And I'm saying, this is ridiculous. I'm going to go in there next week and I'm going to do the dog and pony show about academic honesty. And 86% of these future leaders are going to graduate. They're going to walk off the stage and they're going to have cheated their way to a degree. So I got myself all worked up. I'm out jogging on my jogging trail. This is how I do my thinking or working out or whatever. And I'm like, I'm done with this. I need something else. I am not doing this again. So I go in day 1 and I bring 2 graduation robes, a diploma case, and I had my first performance of the 1-act play, Integrity Switch. And that's how I introduced the course to the students. And that's how I taught them something about academic honesty. I don't know if you want me to tell the whole story. I don't mind people listening having to buy the book.
I like the story. Let's dive in on the 1-act play. I thought it was one of those things. It made me wish that I had a professor that had done that when I was in university or even before then. So yeah, let's hear the version of the 1-act play, Coach
Right.
D's version.
And there's a phrase that's not coming to mind that guided me in coming up with this, and I think I made it better over time. It might pop into my head. But the idea is, when you're trying to impact others, can you do something that's absolutely memorable? Can you come up with something that they'll never forget? Right? But that's great if you can. So I wanted to do something that was so different, a different experience, that they would never forget it. So they walk in and they see my props. I said, hey, welcome to my course. We're going to do a 1-act play and I need a volunteer to play the role of our college president. And of course, nobody volunteers, right? And so the first thing I teach them is I'll wait all day,
Yeah.
right? And so then somebody comes forward and I said, thank you so much. And I might have had to ask them their name. Maybe I knew their name. I don't know. And I said, look, your only line. I said, first of all, put your outfit on, but your only line is to say my name when I point at you. You're going to have this diploma in your hand. And when I come over to you, you're going to shake my right hand, place the diploma in my left hand, and we're going to pose for the photo. And then I'm going to walk across the stage with the closing line. And the play's over. All right, so do you understand what your role is? Now, they're all listening in. So now the students up front, they're the president, they got the diploma, and I turn to the class. I said, look, so before we begin the play, I need you all to participate. Take out your, I always say, take out your PID. And they say, what's a PID? Your personal information device. And I said, okay, look up, just do a search. What percent of college students admit they cheat? And as soon as you get a percent, just shout it out. So think about what's happened already in this class, right? To your point. This is day one. You've never had a class with me. And when was the last time you started a course like this?
Right.
So I'm pretty sure this is something unique because I didn't read it in a book. So I wait till they, 75%. Somebody usually says 86, and I've done this many times in seminars because I think that study is just out there.
Yeah, it's
and it's a good thing because I actually have a sign now. I didn't have it the first time. I actually put, after they tell 86%, I go, you got it. And then I put a sign around my neck, a professionally made sign that says 86%, right? So I've got my robe on. I've got 86% like a sandwich board kind of thing. And I look at the class, I said, so I represent 86% of you who are going to cheat your way through this course in your degree. Okay. Now I'm ready to start the play. So now we've set it up. The first time I didn't have the sign. I have the sign now, already pre-made, so I just have to wait for the answer. And so now point, the person says, Joel Deering, or Coach D, whatever they would say. And I walk over slowly, put my hand out, make sure we pose, hold it for like 3 seconds, 4 seconds. The class is snickering and they go, what is it? Who is this dude? And how quick can I, get out of this course?
And the poor volunteer sweating
right?
story.
So now as I'm walking to like what would be the side of the stage away from the president, I'm waving, my thing at my parents, because that's what everybody does. I'm waving it like at people who came there to support me, but I'm not saying anything. And I get to the other side and I just stop and everything on me changes. And for effect. And then I'll say, now I can live an honest life. And I walk off the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
right? And then I come back and say, okay, play's over. Let's thank our college president. Thank you for volunteering. We're going to do our first activity of the semester. My question is to you, in your small groups, discuss this. Is that how it works? Is that how it works? You're all here to be a leader, and 86% of you are going to cheat your way through. You're going to get your degree. You're going to walk to the other side of the stage, take a deep breath, and say, now, finally, thank goodness I can live an honest life. And then I just let them go.
Then let it. What normally happens after that in the classroom?
What's that?
Well, how does the classroom normally react? Is it a quiet thinking about it? Is it
It is a mixture. It
a
is it's never quite the same because you have different people. Some people are kind of laughing their way, but then they stop laughing because that gets uncomfortable because they think I'm trying to be funny. Then they realize I'm not trying to be funny, and I'm having super fun with a student who volunteered, and I'm enjoying being in the play. Right, so I'm really trying to make them not know where to settle because I'm
yeah.
trying to get their full attention. And they certainly, like, up until the time I get my diploma, maybe the really sharp ones are going, okay, this all started with 86% of the people cheating, so he's going somewhere with this,
Mhm.
right? I don't know, but I don't really. It's so quick. I like, okay, we got to participate. Hey, look on your device. How many? Like they don't really have time to think. It really moves pretty quick on purpose
Yeah.
because I'm doing it for effect. So the reaction is usually mixed. Some snickering at first. Some students know me. Some students might have had me for undergrad, so anything crazy is not a surprise to
Yeah,
them. They're
yeah,
just being, they know they're about to be entertained in some way, shape, or form, and then probably challenged.
yeah.
So, uh, and then I just let them really have some good dialogue, and I will just kind of go around. First of all, I usually don't tell them how to get in groups because I learned something about the group, who
Mhm.
are the leaders, who hangs back, who doesn't get in a group, whatever. And I
Mhm.
go around and listen. I might probe a question or two, and then have them come back and say, okay, would somebody here share something that you discussed in your group? That I might prompt. What do you think the point is that I'm making? Does
Mhm.
this make some sense to you? How many of you are actually sick and tired of hearing about plagiarism,
Right.
right? And then I think I really enjoyed writing this in the book because I had so many drafts of this, writing out for the reader, not just what I did, but all the whys. And the dialogue that I share in the book, which follows all that participation, is fairly, like, I tried to just write what are the things that I typically said to the class, right? I never taped myself. And I really enjoyed writing those things because I knew what I was writing was very close to what I spontaneously delivered without a script to my students. The
Right.
idea of, look, turn your integrity switch on today. And that's where that phrase came from. And I'm not even sure the first time I did it if I intended to say the phrase integrity switch. I don't remember that. But it
Mm.
fits so well. No, no, no. We're not going to cheat our way through. You can start right now in this class. Turn your integrity switch on and let the last time that you cheated in some way be your last time. So that you walk off this stage a year from now, 2 years from now, and you give me a nod. Because I'm going to be sitting there and you give me a nod that you earned that degree. You give me a nod that you bought into this
Mhm.
if you choose. And I can't tell you how many people came off that stage.
Giving you the nod.
And
Yeah,
I
what
can't
are
tell you how many students over time, when they've called for some advice, mentoring, or whatever, sometimes they say, hey, coach, integrity switch. They might start the conversation with integrity switch, right?
Mhm.
Or they might say, yeah, I'm in a real pickle. I'm in a sticky situation. You used to talk about sticky situations, and I this needs to be confidential, but I'd like to get your input. So that's a
Yeah.
long response, but it's a central piece of writing the book, and so I think I don't intend to make all my answers that long, but I think
No
um,
worries.
for someone who has never picked up the book or maybe won't and wants to get a feel for what this topic is about, I think that they can relate to that.
Oh, for sure. Well, it was interesting. One of the things, and it's it was strange that the story reminded me of it. But one of the things that just made me think of was the it's kind of a similar switch, because essentially the story is like, hey, one day I'm going to get to this point where I'm going to have integrity, right? I'm going to graduate from school. I will reach this level of, call it success, call it this point in my career. And once I get to this point, I will do this, or I will think this way, or I will feel this way, right? And I think one of the things for me that I've learned, and it's kind of cliche to say, but I think of like happiness that way, right? Like, hey, one, like I'm going to grind right now. I'm going to do all this work right now. And then one day, once I achieve this level of success, or I have this much money, or I do this or that or the other thing, one day I will get to this point and I will have this feeling, right? I will feel happy. I'll feel
Yep.
satisfied. I'll feel confident in myself to get to that point. And you kind of find over time that as you move through life, and whether it's your career, whether it's your personal life, those goalposts just keep moving. They keep staying the
So
same
right.
distance ahead of you. And you and I struggle with it. Everyone struggles with it. You kind of got to get to this point where it's like, okay, despite that, like I've got to do these things now. I need to, whether it's have integrity now, or I need to figure out how to be content in the happy, or happy in the chaos amidst these things. Like you got to figure out how to do those things now, because as you move forward, those goalposts that you're setting just are going to continue to slide ahead of you, like at the same rate that you're moving forward. And so that's kind of one of the things that story made me think of, like, just, hey, you got to do that right now, whatever it is,
Yep.
whether it's integrity, whether it's an emotion, whatever it is. Like you got to figure out, it's easier said than done, but you got to figure out a way to do that
Yeah.
right now in the moment, and
Yep.
not think that there's some goalpost that you're going to reach and then it's
Yep.
going to happen. So that was one of my the other one, which was another thing. I was reading this book called About Face by David Hackworth, who was it's one of the books that Jocko kind of repopularized, but he was in the army, and one of the things that his leadership mentor taught him, man, I'm forgetting the guy's name right now. I should remember the name, but one of his leadership lessons was showmanship is a vital aspect of leadership. And that's what it kind of like this story, it was one of the things coming from like my engineering background and kind of the more just technical side of trying to understand like what that means, right? Because like you as a professor, you're trying to convey this lesson, you're trying to get the lesson to stick, and you're trying to do these things, and how do you actually accomplish that? And sometimes that requires a little bit of showmanship
Yep.
in teaching the lesson to get those
100%.
things to stick. So
Yep.
that was good. There's a lot of things that story made me think about. So next, give us kind of the brief overview on the A squared B squared framework.
I think I'm in Florida right now, but I think back in Connecticut, I have all my drafts, and there's a stack of maybe 15 pages, white lined paper, and it's got the date on it, and I know it's 2008, and it's got the time on it, and I know it's 3 something in the morning. And I literally woke up out of a deep sleep, and I got paper, I started writing, and I put 4 arrows on a piece of paper. And I had been thinking a lot about my next season. I was thinking in my head because I always had a theme for a season. And I literally, I just started writing. And I still have my original handwritten notes, which at that point, I didn't think was the beginning of a book. It was just how I was thinking. And I'm a journaler. So anyhow, 4 arrows as displayed in the preface of the book. And I kind of, I kind of give the progression there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one is down, one is, they're in like east, west, north, south, if you want to look at it that way. And it was just meant to be something that a team could use, to be helpful. And it started that way, and I used it with the team, but what I came up with was not where they went. And I tell that story. But over time, this stuck with me for a long time. And I started to think about doing a book. Because I had done some publishing. And I can't remember, I probably could go back through and look at drafts and all that. But at some point, I assigned below, behind, above, ahead, 2 A words and 2 B words to the 4 arrows, and I was off and running. And again, I don't know how long it took, but one day, and I say this, when I say this, this is my way of being funny because I'm not a good joke teller. And I don't and I mean it in a way sort of laughing at myself, but a lot of times I'll say I never had an idea I didn't love. Like it's because I love thinking. I love thinking. I love reflecting. I love being creative. So one day, A squared, B squared, 2 A's, 2 B's, A squared, B squared, and I loved it. And so that's sort of how it all started. And then in the preface, because I kind of show the arrows, and then I show arrows with words, and then I needed some help from my graphic designer, but we finally kind of came up with a whole model that has an arrow in it, because the big decision both in the book and in the model was, where do you begin? All right, there's 4 arrows. Where do you begin? So that's how it started, and that's how eventually it just made a lot of sense to me to go from below or foundational things. And the phrase begin with the end in mind has been one of my favorites. And I know I use it so much that students will mention it to me because I just, it's a Stephen Covey phrase. And so I incorporated that into the thing. But that's where the arrow started.
Yeah.
Out of a deep sleep.
That's good. No, I like that. All right, we're going to dive into the book real quick. So I'm going to dive in on the dedication. And this is you talking about your dad and how your dad passed on a lot of lessons. So in my early years, dad was a coach, and I loved watching him at his craft. He was my first youth basketball coach, and I loved every minute of that season. I will never forget my first trip with him to the tourney at the Bangor Auditorium. We watched several quarterfinal matchups of Eastern Maine high school teams we had never seen play. And as each game went on, he spied qualities in certain players and pointed them out to me. He also started telling me story after story of high school coaching seasons starting back before I came along. I knew early on that I was going to be a coach. His influence over time as he moved into educational administration expanded as I took one leadership lesson after another from our many conversations. I soaked them all up. One by one, his perspectives on effective coaching and leadership approaches became ingrained to this day. And then you list 4 kind of key lessons. There's no substitute for preparation. Never try to execute what hasn't been practiced. Number 2, expect the unexpected. Number 3, give every kid their chance, their opportunity. And then number 4 is planning paves the way for success. Plan the work and then work the plan. So I've got a couple questions for you around those 4 rules. Number 1, so there's no substitute for preparation. Never try to execute what hasn't been practiced. Have you ever broken that rule?
Oh, I wish you didn't ask me that. Yes, I did. We somehow escaped. I found myself interim women's women's basketball coach at Roger Williams, because I started as a basketball guy, and I was coaching both basketball and volleyball right out of college. I had been involved in both programs at Springfield. So now we need someone to finish the women's basketball season. Half the players are my volleyball players, right? So I know them all. I had been a high school varsity basketball coach. I had been an assistant. So I'm coaching the women's team. We're at UMass Dartmouth. It was called SMU then. Good game. Really good game. In fact, one of our strongest players, point guard, that night, their top player was going to hit 1,000 points. Okay. And my player said, not on my watch. I think she needed 10 points. So I just remember the game. Very close. That kid actually fouled out. So all I remember is the situation. We're under the basket with the ball. 5 seconds to go. We're underneath their basket. 5 seconds to go.
So
Call
full
the team
court.
in, call timeout. I take my smart player, right, who's just, and she's going to take it out. We're going to do something we've never done because I don't want the ball to come in anywhere near their basket. I want to get the ball down on the other side. So I take a very athletic kid, a very sharp kid, someone who I whatever, and I set up a play. I said, look, you're going to go here, you're going to go here, and then you're going to just fly towards our end of the court. We're all going to be down here, and you're going to be out there by yourself, right? And whoever's taking it out, you're going to just toss it ahead and then just get it and try to dribble away and whatever. I think we're up 1. And so we show them something we've never practiced. I diagrammed it. Understand. Yeah. They go out. They execute it very nicely. There goes the ball. Just out of reach of our player, who chases it the entire length of the floor and never gets to it as it just goes out of bounds, and the clock never starts. SMU ball, 5 seconds under their basket.
Under their own basket. Did it come back to bite you? Did they get it?
Oh, we won the game. We did. I mean, I don't remember if we were up 2, if it was up 3. I don't remember. And they got the ball. They didn't score. They didn't win. It didn't go to overtime. I just know we escaped. And I remember that little quick ride home. That wasn't far from Bristol, Rhode Island. And I'm like, sorry, Dad. Dad, I broke that rule. Now I know why you have that rule.
Got caught on that one. I like it. All right. Rule number 3, give every kid their chance and their opportunity. So I want to ask you, what does that look practically? And how do you know when to close the door on that opportunity?
Yeah. Well, I certainly had players over time who would say I didn't. But I think really what I mean by that is, look, I'm coaching a team sport and they got a uniform on, and you're going to always have your weakest 1, 2, 3 players, but you gave them a uniform and they want to play in that game badly. And garbage time, isn't enough. And so it's just, can you find a way somewhere along the line to really give them a shot? Put them in a situation that's kind of real. Let them feel somehow like what it really feels like. Maybe playing above their head, and maybe it won't work out that well because they're not quite equipped, but how are they ever going to be equipped if they don't get on the court? So I think my interpretation, because I became a volleyball coach, eventually with essentially 7 starters, because we had 6 players on the court and a libero who goes in and out. So you really had 7 players. Probably a roster of 15. Like somewhere along the line, try to give every kid a shot. And that's just, that's how I interpreted it. And so you would, and I'll just finish with this. So here's how, when I think back, here's a way that I handled things that was different than a lot of coaches in volleyball, where I think to some degree I did that. We are against a weak opponent. If we play at all, it's not going to be a close match, and we didn't have a lot of those, but you're going to have some of those. And those are dangerous matches because your team, if you send the wrong message. So, we could go out and smother them in set 1 and maybe 2, and then play all of your reserves in set 3. No. This is a night where, okay, someone has got an injury, or someone's been showing an attitude. I'm starting a reserve. Okay, so I get someone starting. That's never happened to them. It may never happen again. I'm putting a solid player in with all the best players, and they're going to be just fine for the most part. So that's that kid. Set 2, insert 2 new kids with 4 strong players. Try to get them through the whole set, if at all possible. It's real. It's real for them. They're playing with the better players. So I was not one because I saw this happen in volleyball. You win the first two, you put in all your subs, you're not shocked that they don't get a win in set 3. You put all your starters back who you just sent the message is the night's over.
Mm-hmm.
They don't re-engage. Before you know it, you're in the 5th set. The other team is completely believing themselves, and now they're serving, it's hitting the net and drop on the floor. Every possible thing that can go right for them is going right, and you could lose that match.
Yeah,
So
all
I
the
didn't
momentum.
like the idea of losing matches we shouldn't lose,
Mm-hmm.
but I also didn't think it was the best experience for our second team players to just be out there together. They play together every day in practice. Now, we did that at times, and actually they played very nicely because they play together all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of how did it work out for me in my sport. That was a mindset that I had at times that I think helped accomplish that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's good. All right, rule number 4: planning paves the way for success. Plan the work, and then work the plan. So that it kind of reminded me of something that in the business world I think about a lot. So there's this in a quote from Eisenhower. So plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So
That's a good one.
so how? Because I mean, I feel like oftentimes you make plans and then everything goes to hell. Every, nothing works out according to plan. So what do you see a lot of? I guess what do you think see as the big pros to undergoing that planning process, even though the plans are just going to go awry the second that you get on the court?
I think this goes to character building as a leader. Um, Having the discipline to plan consistently whatever it is you're producing, whatever it is you're delivering, I think it goes to your reputation. And your reputation starts with you. How do I feel about this practice today? How prepared, how much time did I put in with my staff for this practice today? Because we're never getting this practice back. And it takes time to plan out a practice and
Yeah,
involve other people. And as is the case with many things, and I get to this in another part of the book, I think it's the change. I think it's a change chapter. We don't evaluate enough. All right, so I plan a practice, I have a practice, then I go home and have dinner and see my family. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That's reasonable. It's been a long day. But do I evaluate that practice? Do I take any time to make notes so that a drill is better or write note to myself or whatever? That's part of planning.
mm-hmm.
Planning, deliver, and then evaluate the plan. Evaluate what you deliver. I think it goes so that preparation goes towards your own character. It goes to how serious you are about your craft. It goes to you feeling okay when things don't go well. It's not because I didn't plan. It's not because I didn't put time into it. But you are right. I mean, the best laid plans, whatever. And I know Dad, I'm confident Dad did not come up with a phrase, plan the work the plan. That's been around a long time, but it probably came on around his time, right? And so I love that phrase. So I think it goes first to your own how you feel about yourself matters as a leader. It matters. And being prepared and valuing preparation is a discipline. So,
Yeah. Well, I
Dad
think
didn't instill all those things in me. He led by example. He was a very prepared guy. I discovered things about myself. I valued him. I valued his advice, but I had to personalize those pieces of advice. And
right.
I'm sure I was different than Dad in some ways. And he watched me at my craft for a number of years. He got a chance to see me coach basketball. He got a chance to see me coach volleyball. And I talked to him probably every Sunday. That was my life experience. And so he wasn't a volleyball guy, but he learned a lot about it because I talked to him about it. So
Yeah.
I think that's what I did with that. And I think I applied it, and I think I still apply it. Um, I have prepared for today. I, I have props in my room here. Um, because I wanted to think in advance about some things.
Yeah, well, and you use the term, I know you use it because I circled it a few times later in the book, the term debrief. And I think that was a term that I ended up stealing from Jocko on exactly what you're saying of, hey, once you've actually executed a thing and you've taken the time to go through it, are you taking the time to go back and debrief it? And I think one of the really useful things for me, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently, is just kind of being able to calibrate how, like, whether it's your own intuition, whether it's your planning, it's really easy to not debrief and think that you're really smart and think that everything you do is like went exactly to plan, especially if you didn't write out the plan beforehand. So if you don't write out a plan beforehand and you're like, all right, I'm going to head in this direction, and naturally, as anything goes, you start whining, you go off, you figure out that you need to actually go that way instead of this way, right? By the time you get to that point, unless you write it down, you don't really remember that your original plan was to go this way and that you actually ended up going this way. And the reason that's important, at least for me, is it's important to remember when you're planning for the next thing that when you're doing that, you probably are going to be off course again, and like understanding that those things change so much. And at least for me, it's humbles me because it reminds me that, hey, I need to make the plan. I need to understand those things. But at the end of the day, my intuition's not going to be right. And the direction I think we're going to go is probably going to change. And I need to be ready for those changes. And I need to be looking out for all of those indicators that are going to tell me to change, because all of those debriefs from the past have all told me that, hey, what you think at the beginning is not how it's going to end up going. And you're going to take a lot of turns along the way.
You know what's interesting is, as I listen to you on that I really love how you put that all together. Begin with the end in mind. My big overlapping thing, it connects to so many parts of the topics that I chose to write about. The 12 chapter titles, the 24 subtitles, and that was a perfect example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you plan because you're looking ahead to something, but you recognize over time that you're going to have to adjust and adapt and all those things. So,
yeah, like when your players organize the arrows in a different way than you expected.
perfect example. And then you say, "You got it.
You got it right." Yeah, spot on. Yeah, and then they won't know
That's
until
humble pie right there. That's
yeah,
humble pie." But you know what? Nobody was happier than me.
yeah, and
Nobody
then
was happier than me. Like my because I just want people to think. I want people to take time to think. I want my players to take time to think. I want you to be. I think I used the phrase. I think it's original, but maybe not. The lost art of thoughtfulness. I
mm-hmm.
think that phrase is in there somewhere in the book. Because we're too quick to say things before we think them through or whatever. So
Yeah.
my
Well, one of
players
those
were
things.
thinking, they were engaged, and and that's part of. And then they were going to believe in this thing they came up with, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, let's go.
Yeah, one of the I can't remember if we added the context to it, but essentially, because your framework with the four arrows was the north, south, east, and west, and essentially you asked your players to organize the arrows, and then they essentially make like a step ladder.
They made a step ladder,
Yeah, moving
one step at a
forward.
time. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, how brilliant is that?
yeah, and you're like, that's perfect. And one of the things that made me remember or reminded me of, and I'll reference Jocko a lot because a lot of the obviously my dad growing up was a huge leadership influence on me, and then ever since I've been in my career, I listened to a lot of podcasts and stuff. So a lot of the kind of base rules I think about came from Jocko. But one of the things he talks about is, and I like it because it helps my engineering brain with the percentages. But essentially, if one of your subordinates comes to you with a 80% plan, right? It's like you think your plan is 100%, which side note, like it's not. But say you think your plan is like 100% and is perfect, and a subordinate comes with an 80% plan. It's like, that's good. Like, let them run with it, because the fact that they own it, the fact that they made it, the fact that it's theirs means that they are going to be able to run with it a whole lot more. And I like the percentage because it kind of forces the question like onto you of like, hey, what percentage do I like break off and step in? Right. So like if it's 80% locked in, and 20% I think they can improve. Like, okay, just shut up. Don't even say the 20%. Let them run with it, because them executing on that 80% is going to be better than you chiming in with your 20% or whatever. But then it kind of forces the question of like, all right, if that's the 80% mark, where, like, let's start scaling that down. And then how do you act at, if it's a 70% plan, then a 60% plan, then 50% plan, kind of how do you adjust and then try to give feedback in each of those scenarios? And I mean, just like anybody, I'm by no means an expert at handling those situations and figuring out how to approach it. But that was one of the lessons that it reminded me of, is like, what's that percentage where you're like, yep, good, y'all crushed it. That's it. We're running with it.
And I got two quick things before you go to the next question. One, you were talking about debriefs. My assistant coach, as we built 2 championship programs at Roger Williams, was an Air Force navigator. So I'm hearing stories from a navigator who went to the Gulf War, all these conflicts, and understanding that every single thing was debriefed. So I had an influence on me. And the other thing, because a lot of the book is for coaches, but not just for coaches, but this topic of planning gets into coaching strategy this way. And maybe you're going to go there, so it'll just be a preview, and I'll just leave it alone. But so what is one of my strategies as a coach competitively? I want to disrupt you, right? When we compete, I want you to feel completely uncomfortable. Whatever we do, I want that to be uncomfortable for you. And the concept is this. So you've planned, and I coach against competent coaches. So they had a plan. I wanted to disrupt that plan early in the match. And that might just be, okay, you played us twice this year, but you haven't seen this lineup. You played us twice this year, but you haven't seen this defense. You played us twice this year, but we didn't try this one out on you. So that those players who know us well, I want to look down halfway through set 1 and see confusion on that. Not to be mean. This is just competition.
Competition, yeah.
Because they're really good. One of the things we can do is disrupt them. We can be hard to play against. And we can take all the planning and preparation they did. To their credit, they did all that. We can almost make it go out the window if we can execute well enough on things they weren't expecting.
Right.
All right. And so and I actually think basketball is way easier to do that with than volleyball. And that started for me back with basketball. Full court press, 3/4 press, half, whatever, 1-3-1. I mean, you name it, right? You can keep changing and flipping things. I think basketball is way easier to be unpredictable,
right,
but you still got to execute.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. All right. Jumping forward to chapter number 3. So right now, and I'm glossing through the book, just hitting the wave tops on certain points, obviously. So get the book. But chapter 3, that's in the below section of the book. So diving in. Before we take on the task as leaders to manage others, I sure hope we have taken the time to grow in the area of managing ourselves. Have you established a standard for yourself that requires your actions to align with your words? What do you intend to do when they don't? Will your trusty antenna go off when you start to veer from the values and principles you hold dear? So, how does one go about learning how to manage themselves?
I wonder how many people never give it a thought, because they got a lot of responsibility. They tackle their responsibility. They put in a good day's work, but they're not paying attention. They're not paying attention to the cues coming from those they're working with, displeasure, objections that they're willing to give you. They're not unpacking failure. That's one of the sections. It's self-awareness, and so I manage myself, right? So, and I think I gave the example. I don't know if it was there. That I gave an example in the book of it took me a long time to learn these things, but late in my career, when I wasn't coaching, a student comes into my office. I get up out of my desk. I go sit in a chair on one side of the room, and they're going to sit in the other chair because my desk is just full of distractions. That's self-awareness. If I sit at my desk and I'm talking to you, right, and I got my cell phone on, I can be all over the place. I'm sending a message, okay? Cell phone's off. I'm not answering the phone. Give them my attention. That's just a small example, I think, of managing yourself. I know what I'm like. I'm 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 a multitasker big time. I'm highly productive, high energy, enthusiastic. So I'm psyched that you're in my office. I'm so happy you're there. But if I don't manage myself, you're going to see someone who's kind of with you but kind of distracted. Yeah, it's Coach D. I want you to see I'm into this conversation with you. That's an area I grew in.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to think about it. I had to kind of look around. I had to notice that I was distracted. I probably was apologizing to students. Sorry, I got to take this call. And then they leave. I'm like, why? That didn't feel right. Right? So self-awareness is huge.
Yeah.
And
You have to
that,
learn how to
we're
give
talking
yourself.
about growth mindset. I mean, I got to recognize that I need to grow. I have areas that could be improved. So I don't know if that's a good example, but it's a very basic one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it reminds me, and gosh, hearing myself, I'm going to reference Jocko so many times. Uh, but one of the, I guess it'd be kind of a metaphor that he put to it was he made this video, and the whole premise was essentially you've got to think of yourself as both the general and the soldier in your own life. So you've got to be the person who is, making the decisions, determining the strategy, making the plan, figuring out which way you want to go. And then you've got to be the soldier that just executes on those things and moves forward, right? And I think thinking of those as kind of like two different hats to put on, of like, hey, right now, do I have my general hat on or do I have my soldier hat on, right? And just in a frame of managing myself. And so like some of the few like little things I do is like at the end of the day, on my good days, I don't get this done every day, but I try to like schedule the day tomorrow, plan the day tomorrow. Hey, what's going to happen tomorrow? And then remembering like in the morning that the soldier does not get to like talk back or like you've got the orders, like the general wrote the orders, I got my schedule for the day, like that was yesterday. Today I'm in soldier mode, like in the morning. That's kind of what I think of soldier mode, and my job is to just execute on what the general from yesterday told me to do, and just not letting. And when you have that hat on, like just you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to ask questions about the orders. You're not. This isn't the time to do it, and just move forward. And that really helped me, especially with. It sounds simple, but things like snoozing the alarm. Like, you're not allowed to, like, if you're in soldier mode, you're not allowed to snooze the alarm. Like you don't get to be like, oh, like, well, I'm tired. I should have 30 more minutes of sleep because gosh, if I have like, nope, that's not the mode. You're the general tonight can decide if you need more sleep tomorrow. But right now, like you are in soldier mode and you just look at the task and knock those things out.
That's
I
great.
think that was one of the things that kind of section reminded me of. I mean, man, you could do a whole several hours about managing
That could be a
yourself.
whole book.
Yeah, giving grace to yourself
Well, it
throughout
probably
the
is. I
process.
mean, self-management is a pretty big topic, so I
Yeah,
know. I'm sure that book is out there, probably 50
yeah,
of them.
yeah, exactly. All right, so right after that paragraph talking about managing ourselves, you list four. I don't think you call them core values, but I think it's your four core values: gratitude, loyalty, authenticity, and humility. And so, my question for you is: how do you define loyalty?
The authenticity one to me kind of goes hand in hand with integrity. Like I really want to live an honest life. That's kind of, and I guess that was the other piece of the one act play. Live an honest life. Live an honest life. So um, I love people, and probably the closest people in my life are very authentic. They're the same people through the ups and downs, and it's just a lot easier to be yourself. So authenticity in me is just, I just want to be me. I want to grow, but I don't want to try to be something I'm not. So that's good. I mean, gratitude, there's a lot of, there's going to be a spiritual spin-off to my book. I'll just say that. I'll just leave it at that. But I'm a Springfield College guy, spirit, mind, body, and in my own life, I think I sprinkle a little bit of that in there. But the this entire book, this entire table of contents can go in another way. So like something like gratitude is, you know, that's from the depth of your heart, the depth of your soul. It's a perspective and an attitude. I am grateful. I got lots of things to be grateful for, and I don't want to lose sight of that. So, um, if I act in a way that's not grateful, it probably gets my attention. I get my own attention, right? So, um, that's gratitude. Humility. Um, that's been a hard one for me in the last decade because I have been honored many times. There's been a lot of way more than I believe I deserved and way more than I was comfortable with. And so those were hard. Those were preparing, some kind of a comments to receive a fairly significant award was at times painful for me. Like I would just rather have someone said thank you, or whatever. So, um, but but it's a tension where I was in a competitive world where you're trying to be successful,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certainly a high achiever, but at the same time, it's like it's not to win awards. It's to challenge yourself to see how good can this team be, or any to this day. I go out and golf. Golf is always going to win. But what about today? Could I get 4 birdies today? I think that might be a record for me, right? If I get 2 birdies in a day, I'm like, but whatever. It's the challenge of the achievement, right? So, I don't know if that helps, but that's the thoughts on a few of those.
No, no, that's good. All right, jumping forward. So now we're going to be in the behind section. So we touched a little bit on below, moving over to behind, talking about a championship timeout.
Oh,
So my first collegiate volleyball post started back in 1981 when I was named the first varsity coach of a brand new women's program. This program was initiated by students as a club, and through their efforts, it became part of our intercollegiate athletic program. We had no home court. In fact, we practiced the first year in a local armory with cannons pointed at the court. That's pretty funny.
the
Fast
truth.
forward to our fast forward to our fourth season, and we found ourselves in our first regional championship match. We got there quickly with some effective recruiting, including a setter named Sharon, who was what I would call a gamer, a natural-born leader and team captain. Sharon played well in practices, had tons of focus, but played her very best in matches. A gamer. So I really like that because I think I've come across a few folks that I hadn't put a definition to it or a word to it like gamer before, but I've played with a few people back in basketball days that were gamers where they would just be if you were at practice you wouldn't think that they'd be the top scorer, the person who shines, and they would seem kind of like the middle of the pack, and then all of a sudden you put them in a game and they're just absolute rock stars, right? And I think I always kind of admired them because I was not that. So one kind of thing that I wanted to ask you, since you've got a long career of coaching, is what are the things that you found in common about gamers?
Uh, they were true team players. They understood that they were in a team sport. They're playing a game with others against others, and that is different than a cross country race. They're on a team, they're trying to get points. But if you're the best runner, you might be out there alone all the time, right? And you're getting all those points, but I think a true team player, I think, is one. Probably someone who loves the game, and you can tell when someone loves a game. Like my grandson loves basketball. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness. Just follow him around for 1 week and you'll know how much he loves basketball because he's at it all the time and he loves it. I hope they never lose that, right? But so I think they actually just love the game, the sport, or they just love competition, um, and they're willing to work at it. That's the other thing. Someone like Sharon got good at a lot of sports. She played 3 sports, was a leader, captain of all 3 sports at Roger Williams, and she obviously worked at it. She was a good athlete, better than good athlete, but she worked at it because she had to develop skill in all these things. So I think those are a couple of things. Um, yeah, and and maybe the other thing I got to be careful here. Who's not a gamer, right?
Mhm.
So it's and it's just this was a challenge. This was something I always probably felt failure over. I had wonderful athletes, dedicated, hardworking, solid players who just couldn't believe in themselves, or the moment got too big for them, or they were just nervous when they competed. So they played better in practice than they could in a game, and they never worked through that. So I think a gamer is also someone that's got a high level of confidence, but it's the right kind of confidence,
Mhm.
right? So yeah,
Yeah, it's special when you come across. Like I said, I will. Uh, I'm definitely in the bucket of was not a gamer and was better in practice than I was in the games back then. And it's interesting because there's different arenas in life where uh you it was interesting. Like, so one of the things, and like this is a little intimate, but like basketball, I would say I was not a gamer. I was definitely better. Like anyone I played with would have 100% know that I was much much better in practice than I was in the game.
hmm.
There's no question about that. But then I would get into areas like academics, where you put me in a like in front of a test for school. Like I've got no problem with that. Like I would
Yeah,
like no nerves, like 100% fine
yeah.
taking a test. It could be like the biggest final of the school year, and I have no problem being just
Hmm.
totally fine in that situation and
Hmm.
crushing it. So it's always interesting to kind of see that you kind of recognize it, and there's different domains in life, and in some of those domains you're gamers, and some of them you're not, and really kind of interesting to face the fact of that and then try to work through like okay, how do I become a gamer in this thing? Like what are these psychological hurdles that are in front of me that I need to overcome to now become a gamer in this arena of life? It's a hard pill to swallow, but the my experience is that the gamers are rare, especially if you define gamer as like actually playing better in the game than they
Yeah.
do in practice. Because it's one thing to there's being better in practice than you are in the game. There's playing the same in the game that you are in practice. And then there's the people who play better in the game
Yeah.
than they do in practice. And that tranche I feel like is really special. There's a lot of folks who can play the same in a game than they do in practice. But that
Yeah.
tranche of people who really excel in the moment and in the game, those to me at least I found, and I don't have nearly the career in sports that you do, but those folks are pretty rare to find.
There's some good research out there in sports psychology that really breaks this topic down in some really interesting ways. Opportunity, challenge, you know, all
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. And those are things that you as a coach try to press the right buttons. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you picked up on that one.
All right. Jump back in the book. Now we are in the above section. So we talked a little bit about below, behind. Now we're circling up to above, diving into the book. We can get stubborn as leaders when it comes to this type of. Oh, we're talking about change right now, by the way. So this chapter is
Okay.
on change. We can get stubborn as leaders when it comes to this type of thing. A well-defined process of change will include not only that the change will be evaluated over a period of time, we talked about the debriefs, but how that will be accomplished. What metrics, data, or results will be useful to determine if the change was for the better? Are we sure we will be able to obtain that information? Have we predetermined the time intervals for assessment? let me be clear. I didn't spend any time forming questions like those early in my career, and that is why I am sharing them here.
I love that. I loved when I wrote that.
Yes.
I loved when I wrote that because I was trying to write to readers. And I remember, I can't remember, but I remember when that came, I probably was typing it, but I remember when that came out because I'm just writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I like that, you know, because it was the truth. Like, and that's, I think, a good example of humility. I'm sharing advice, but I'm also saying, you know what? I mean, I didn't think this way when I started, so I hope I'm getting you when you started, and I'm sharing these only because I learned that I should have been asking these questions. So a little
Mm-hmm.
humility, but it also, I tried at times to keep talking to the reader, to keep so they knew I was talking to them and with them. You know what I mean? So that was one of those little hinge things where, hey, Petty, that's why I'm sharing it with you because
Well,
I never thought this way.
well, it's one of those things too. At least for me, one of the because I, in the business kind of startup-y world, you always hear these stats on, this number of company or this number of startups fail, this number of, new businesses fail, et cetera, et cetera. And then you also hear the wisdom as old as time, like you got to set goals. If you don't set goals, you're destined to fail. Because one of the things a phrase that I heard recently that I just absolutely love, and it was a punch in the gut for me that I needed was most people, and this includes me, they don't define what success looks like because that also is defining the criteria for failure, right?
Yeah.
So by setting a goal, and especially if it's specific with dates, with the metrics, and can you find the metrics? At the same time, by doing that, you're setting the conditions for failure. And it's one of those that's these questions are one of the it's just like if you ask anybody, it's wisdom that everybody knows, it's something we've all heard of before, but somehow we forget to do it all the time. And I still do it today. Like there's so many, whether it's a because I think for me it's always justified as like, well, I've got like the longer term goals, right? Like the longer term metrics of, okay, we want to get this many users, or we want to hit this revenue thing, or this, that, or that thing. But then you forget about scaling that down the entire time of like, okay, what do I do in the next day? What's the next week? What's the next month? Like, what are the metrics there? And then doing the debrief to actually figure out, hey, did we accomplish those things, and did we head in the right direction? And yeah, as I was reading it, there's just one of those things where if you asked me 10 years ago, I could have parroted that wisdom off. And at the same time, I wasn't doing any of it and I didn't really understand it. And I'm sure 10 years from now, I'll look back at myself today and be like, oh, Petty didn't understand this bit of wisdom, like right here, like these questions. Like even today, like I think I understand them. I think I've gotten a better grip of them. But I can always guarantee you, and I hope that 10 years from now, I understand it even at a deeper level to where I look back and it's like today, like, oh, Petty still didn't really know what this actually meant at the time.
I'm curious, and I probably will find out because I go back through the book quite a bit because there's probably going to be a second edition. I don't know. I mean, I can correct the book. Like there may.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did a lot of editing, but I would be curious how many questions I asked in the book. Like how many actual questions are in the book, and of course, at the end of every chapter, there's review questions. Again, because I'm trying to get people to think. Did you like that? Did you like the?
Oh, I mean, one of the I love it. One of the things is it's fun. I've got a little bit of a story around it. We had an intern last year, and he was in MBA school, like great kid. And one day we were driving somewhere. I forget where we were going, but anyways, he asked me a question. He's like, "Hey, I've been learning about this." I forget. I think it was a SWOT analysis. Is actually what it was. He was like, "I've been learning about SWOT analysis at school. Like, I'm sure that you've already done it. You've already thought about it. Like, da 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 da. But like, I think it'd be a cool exercise for us to do." And one of the things I told him in the moment was like, "Look, at least where I'm at right now, questions are far more important than answers, right? It's always like, what questions are you asking yourself? And then even though, like, it's kind of what we were just talking about, even though there's all of the questions that we know we should be asking ourselves all of the time, the biggest question is, how are we prioritizing all of those questions? So number one,
Yeah.
you need to be focused on questions versus answers. And then two, how are we prioritizing those questions? I was like, so even if it's something that like you think I know you think I've done before, or all of these things, like it's always worth the question. It's worth me asking myself, like, hey, is this a good question that I should be asking myself right now? Even if I've done this SWOT analysis thing 6 months ago, is it time to revisit that? Right. So there's always like, oh, and then kind of my point to him was, I love questions and always ask me those questions. And my response may be like, hey, that question is not a priority right now, but it's much more, at least kind of where I've landed right now, is thinking about questions is a whole lot more important than answers. Because if you find the right question and you simplify it down and you really understand the question, I think of it as it takes time to break down questions and actually try to figure out what you're asking. And once you figure out what you're asking, the answer is obvious. But the challenge is actually asking the question over and over and over again and getting intimate with the question and actually thinking about, what does this question mean? And then after you've dug enough, you find the answer.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of a tangent off your thing,
No,
but
I think, you know, one of the main things I want from people who get the book is that there's a place that makes them stop, turn
Mhm.
the corner of the page, just at least one of those. Like, I've never seen that before. Or, gee, I don't get what this guy's saying. I got to think about that, because that's what I do with my books.
Mm-hmm.
When
Yeah.
I stop, I turn the corner, I make a note. I'm like, I like that, you know.
Well, speaking of the next part, I know you asked me the other day which part of the book was one of the big things that I need to hear. So that was this section. We're still in above, and we're talking. You're talking about confidence and learning and like coaching players,
Yep.
and instilling confidence in them. So diving in on the book. Instilling confidence in those you are leading is a topic of great importance. As duties are assigned, especially those requiring new skills, you have to ask, is someone making sure that the keys to success are understood? Have common errors associated with these responsibilities been discussed? Do they get a chance to make errors? When an error is made, do they hear good job when in fact it wasn't? In training coaches over many years, this was a blind spot that I discovered in many developing coaches. What was meant by good job related to their effort in the attempt. Often, none of the technical keys had been taught had been exhibited. Be aware that the learner will translate that feedback into thinking they performed correctly. A much better response when a good attitude attempt is full of errors would be to simply say again. Have the learner repeat the attempt with consistent emphasis from you on the technical keys you are looking for. So this was one of those things that I felt like, man, I haven't paid attention to coaching, like sports leadership, in a long time. And that, I guess, you describe me. I'm one of those developing leaders that still has a hard time distinguishing between saying the words good job and saying something like this again, where you, yeah, I'm still learning it enough to
You're
where it's
not
hard to
alone.
articulate for me.
You're not alone. Just go spend a week observing youth sport coaches who have huge hearts, and they're in it for all the right reasons, but they coach the way they were coached. They have had no formal training. They don't, they're trying to be positive with these kids, and they don't even, they're not hearing it. Good job. They're not they're just saying something positive to them.
Right.
And they're not realizing that, that kid is not throwing with their right hand and stepping in opposition. And if we don't get that right early on, we're never going to get that right. Right. So that's not a good job. You stepped with your right and you threw with your right, and that's not going to be effective. Right.
Mhm.
So that's got to be corrected. So, but then I like how then I hope all these coaching things, how do I apply that to myself as a leader? Right.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, well, and I
do I
think
give do I give people a chance to make mistakes?
Mhm. And I think another part of that too that I struggle with is because I'm a talker. Anyone who works with me knows I'm a talker. Uh, in the one of the things I love about the again is that it's so simple and it's such a short. I think as leaders, at least for me, as I've kind of grown, you want to try to fix everything at once, right? And I know there's a bunch of analogies of like the golf coach who, there's one golf coach who says, don't do this, change this, change this, change that, change all of these little things, and now swing. And then in between, like, okay, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, versus the golf coach that's like, hey, tweak this, the way you did this, just move that. All right, 100 more reps of that. Okay, then after 100 reps, okay, now we're going to tweak this part and do 100 reps. And I think the again was just like the ultimate extreme of like the minimal, like most simple feedback they need from what they're doing, and also like you're not confirming a bad habit, and then it's like the scale of like simplicity and like correction. So then like the next step from there, and I know you've got a lot of kind of spectrum diagrams in your
Yeah.
book, right? Like how to like
Yeah.
working back from there. The next simplest thing is like only correct one thing, like only address like if it's volleyball, like maybe it's their swing or maybe it's their approach or this, that, or the other thing. And that scale of where like my tendency is to be all the way over here with like, change that, change this, change that, change that, change this, change this, and now try it again. Right. And so I think that kind of helped me calibrate like what is the extreme version of like the most simple feedback if they didn't do a good job. And you just want to give them like the shortest amount of thing they need to hear against like,
Yeah.
okay, again is kind of like all the way at the extreme of that
Yeah.
spectrum.
Well, you brought this up, and we're kind of talking about confidence. I did a little seminar for a business staff yesterday on the topic of continuous improvement. We had a blast, but I showed this scale, the success scale.
Oh, this, yeah.
And that actually, I have that. But for those you mentioned, I call them leadership skills. Every chapter has one. But the words really fit into the conversation we're having. I won't. I can't. I think I can. I can or I will. But this idea, it's about how do I get better? How do I get there? Right. Um, I'm
More
glad you
questions.
like that part.
Yeah, that was good. That was, and
I
it's
think
funny,
that could help a lot of coaches. I think that could help a lot. That one thing right there, I think could help a lot of coaches if they reflect on it, become better teachers in whatever sport they're coaching.
right. Yeah, no, it's one of those things. Once I read it in yours, and I listened to things more. It's one of those things that it was already the lesson was already in a lot of the things I heard, but for whatever reason, like that made it click more. And so now that I've read that there, it kind of really sunk in with me. Now I'm hearing it everywhere, right? Now as I'm listening to like other leadership stuff, I'm hearing them talk about similar aspects. It's like, okay, I feel like on the scale, I understand that a little bit more. Like I know I've got a whole lot more to grow and learn, but that was a good step forward for me in kind of understanding. Hey, it doesn't have to be either good job or bad job.
Right.
There's a middle ground
Right.
there that will help
They
the
got it
athlete.
wrong. Hey, try that again. I mean, they got it. They didn't get it right. You want to take a look at them. You might need another look to figure out what's wrong or what's right. And so again, give them 3 or 4 shots at it, not just one.
Yeah.
But then that gets into managing practices. I know that's not easy, but that's how you develop the craft of coaching.
Yeah, for sure. All right, diving back into the book. So we hit below, behind, above. Now we're jumping. Oh man, I'm skipping so many parts of this book.
That's
Forget the
good
book.
because people are going to need to read it because you've
Yeah.
missed some really good parts. I'm actually happy about that. Like you
Yeah.
did. Like I'm not even going to mention them. I'm really
Yeah.
happy that there's plenty that people are gonna. If anybody gets a book, they're gonna go, "Oh wow, what's this
Yeah.
all about?"
Yeah.
So
A
I
lot
really
of
like how you're doing this.
well, it's another thing that I copied from Jocko. So shout out Jocko for showing me how to do guiding me on that. So diving in on ahead, we're talking about adversity and kind of so you're telling a story. I'm going to jump in the middle of the story, but you're talking about just adversity, kind of inner team conflict, so internal conflict within the team. And so you say, truthfully, sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better. Do your best in this gathering to facilitate the conversation. And so you just more context, you're talking about having all the athletes there. You've got the team in front of you, and there's some internal conflict. So
yeah, there's something. It's just something's wrong, so you kind of
yeah.
pull the team in and you try to address it. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So often when some of the baggage gets put out there in front of everyone, that is enough. Sometimes venting and feeling safe doing that is all that is needed. When a conflict between teammates is discovered, you may want to facilitate a discussion and start with some ground rules. Establishing boundaries for healthy dialogue will help to avoid additional or collateral damage. You might discover that within a day or two, those involved decide to meet and talk things over, or team leaders might arrange a players only session. There are two things I learned related to these types of situations. Number one, whatever the cause of the strife or internal conflict is, until it gets named in front of everyone, it is not likely to be fixed. Secondly, however you circle up your team, one thing is certain. All of the problems are in the circle. And more importantly, so are all of the solutions. Hopefully for my teams, the volleyballs came back out of the baskets sooner than later. Very often, some renewed appreciation for the opportunities in front of the team outweighed nagging issues. And so the one thing, both those lessons resonated with me. But number one, I think was particularly interesting. Whatever the cause of the strife or internal conflict, until it gets named in front of everyone, it is not likely to be fixed. So talk to me about that. What does it getting named kind of look like in practice?
Well, I think the point is that a lot of times you've got friction and you're trying to isolate it, and you bring the one or two players over, and you don't. The idea is, look, if we're going to be a team, we're going to be a family, we're going to have hard conversations, right? We're going and there's some other parts of the book that I talk about that, some things that we did, the nail award, right, and the glue award.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a preview for someone, but like I think you and that's actually a good example. We had positive conversations as a group. We learned to have conversations as a group that were positive, that were systematic. There were reasons for them. These little award ceremonies, for example, scouting reports, a minute or two after a match. Like, we were coming together for all sorts of reasons. One of the reasons has also got to be to confront conflict, right? So if you have a healthy group that is coming together, before practice, after practice, before games, after games, whatever, they've got to be able to come together when things aren't going well, and we've got to be able to say it, right? Half the time it's me. I was always relieved it was me in a way, because I'm like, well, I'm not surprised. I'm not for everybody. Some of you should never have come and played for me. You watched me coach. When I recruited you, I said, come and sit behind the team when we might lose. Now, we don't lose much. So find the best teams on our schedule and sit right behind us so you can see me maybe at my worst, most intense. You can see how we actually operate. And don't come here if that's not going to work for you.
Oh, like that's a good strategy.
It was me. I'm like, okay, I can apologize. I'm big on apologizing. I can make change. I whatever. When it's between others, that's tricky, because to name it means you might have to say something about someone or whatever. And so that takes some help. But it's the truth. If we don't get it out there, now, if it's me, I hope it's a captain. I hope it's a players only meeting.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. You guys, I don't care if you talk about me. I really don't want you talking about others without them there. I don't care if it's me. I don't blame you.
Yeah, I always say I can rip myself apart better than anybody else can.
and I knew that my loyal players who could put things in perspective, and they understood me, they would be in the room saying, look, yeah, I get it. He is a character. Yeah, that's not my favorite part about that guy either. but look, you got to accept that. That's something that's not going to change with him. He has a high standard, or he's this, or he's that. don't expect that to change because that's this dude,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or, hey, that's something you should have been in his office long ago talking with him about. He invites us all the time to have short accounts and come in if something's bothering you. That's where you kind of count on the leaders, if you're not there, to help some of the players understand how to work through this conflict. But
Yeah.
I just know other coaches experience the very same thing, and I don't have any big solution, but I knew I had to at least address it in the book.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things I think, when you talk about it getting named in front of everyone. And I think one of the things that, as you're, at least for me, you're growing early in your career, you're looking at yourself a lot, you're trying to understand yourself, and we talked about managing ourselves earlier, right? You're trying to figure out how to manage yourself. And when you start doing that, you start seeing all of the ways that you could be better and all the mistakes you're making. And you debrief with yourself at the end of the day. It's like, okay, like here's my entire list of foibles that I have and all these things. And then situations come up. And I was actually talking about this the other day. You kind of have to, you're trying to develop yourself and grow here. And you're trying to understand, like, just for yourself, what are the values for myself? What are exactly what we talked about when talking about managing ourselves. What standard am I holding myself to? And then you see yourself falling below that standard all the time. So you've kind of drawn a line in the sand. You're like, this is where I'm drawing the line for myself. And then and then every day you fall below that standard in certain ways. And then you kind of get to the day where your job is, despite having drawn the line for yourself and falling below that line often, you then have to draw that line for other people and for the entire organization, and then be the person that does have the conversation and then does name it when someone else is falling below that standard too often across the team. So you, at least it's been a struggle for me, because you see yourself falling below the standard. You know that there's times that you don't meet the standard, yet you're still the person in the seat that has to go in front of the team and say, hey, this is what's going on. And whether it's in front of the team, whether it's with an individual themselves, of like, hey, you're falling short on the standard and this, that, or the other way. And the entire time you're just thinking to yourself, like, boy, like I fall short of these things all the time too. And who am I to be the person to decide where that line should be drawn? Yeah. But at the end of the day, you have to do it. Like, that's your role as the leader on the team. And so despite all of those things, you've got to go have that conversation and name it. And then, by the way, just like any skill, just like your approach, just like setting, just like spiking, the same way that it takes thousands of repetitions to get good at that, and you're going to fail at that a lot, and you're going to suck at that a lot, like through your sports career, anytime you mess that up, you're the person that has to deal with it, right? Like, you get an error from a hit, you do a bad set, you get a bad bump, and you shank a ball out to the left, right? Normally, you're the one paying for that. And sometimes it's obviously the team, if it's in a game and the team loses a point, et cetera. Like, that's part of the team. But then as a leader, you walk into a conversation, right? And you become a leader. And now this whole like naming conflict thing is on your plate. And you've got to go through this period of life where, as a growing leader, you are going to suck at that conversation, and you're going to fail at that conversation, and you're going to be registered like, okay, Coach D taught me that I've got to name these things and I've got to call it out. But at the same time, like, man, I know a better leader would be able to handle this conversation a whole lot better than me. But despite that, I'm about to have to go face this person or face this room and call it out. And I'm going to fall on my face. I'm going to say words that I'm going to regret afterwards, and I'm going to learn from it. But despite all of those things, I've got to walk in there and have that conversation. And I think that's just a tough, I would say I'm still, and I probably always will be in that period of like trying to get better and better at that conversation. But I think that's one of those tough transitions in a leadership journey, is going from that, like, hey, I manage myself and I know how poorly I perform under my own management, yet I'm still the person that has to hold that standard across other human beings.
You're looking at chapter 11, overcoming adversity, and I'm not pleased with, proud of. I'm just happy that I know. I mean, I spent so much time editing this and decisions on what I was going to put in. Like, I didn't shy away from something like conflict or confronting conflict. You'll find it in chapter 3. You find it here in chapter 11. Like, things that in any kind of a team, okay, sports team, but then company teams, whatever, the universal things that will destroy or help you be not effective. I wanted to talk about those things. I wanted to find ways to put those in perspective and bring up those topics, try to give a few examples of how I might have grown in handling things and maybe how I hadn't grown, failures that I had. But to say to the leader, don't expect, okay, your career just changed. You were trained, and I see this happen all the time in so many professions. You were trained specifically in some skillful way, and that's been your job. Now, because you've been so effective and everyone likes you, you've become a manager. You didn't go to school to be a manager. You went to school for this other thing that you've been doing, but now you're managing people who does that. Okay, what leadership training have you had? I see this happen all the time because I've worked with a bunch of different companies and had a lot of conversations with really successful people, and I ask a lot of questions to help me help others. But that, you know what I mean? Like, they don't know what to expect. And so I want to say, you better expect a crisis. What are you going to do in a crisis? You better expect conflict. How are you going to confront it? Will you even confront it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You might find that, and you don't realize this, you're such a dominating, you might find that no one ever disagrees with you. Yeah, and you know what you better think about? It's because you go into meetings, you tell everybody how it is, they know you're not open to feedback, so they just nod their head. Way to go, boss. Yes, 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 yes. They don't agree with you. It's not working, but you don't want to hear it. Right? So I try to give some examples of things, and I probably fit all those examples, but I try to give examples to the young leader, aspiring, emerging, developing leader. That's my target audience. Very focused on my target audience. And all you people who write these leadership books that I read and love, you don't need my book. Now, you might bump into it, you might like part of it. I'm writing to people that haven't had a lot of training in leadership. I'm writing to young coaches managing a program for the first or second time. I'm saying, look, can you not make some of the mistakes I made, or could you at least think about all 36 topics in my book? Because you need to. You're going to bump into them all.
Yeah, well, I think one of the kind of frames, so I do this thing called jujitsu a decent amount now, and it's one of the martial arts, and so it has the whole belt program.
So does my son.
Yeah.
He is obsessed with it.
Yeah. So I'm
He
the same.
loves it.
It's got the whole ranking system of white belt, blue belt, purple, brown, black, and it takes years to kind of progress through that, right? And one of the things that one of the kind of core takeaways on leadership that I continually relearn over and over and over again is that it's a skill. And just like any skill, it takes, and kind of like what we already talked about, it takes a lot of reps. And what happens, and I know it's certainly happened for me, you get to this level, especially early in your career, where you start getting really proficient, assuming that you're growing in your career. You start getting really proficient at certain things, right? So maybe that's software coding, maybe that's sales, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's operations, maybe it's product, whatever field that is. And from 18 years old to 25 years old, you're developing this skill, right? And you're going from white belt to blue belt to purple belt, and you're growing these skills. And then all of a sudden, one day, you get this new kind of responsibility set that gets put on your plate, and it's this thing called leadership, where you're still a white belt, right? And so you've got to go from this thing that you're a purple belt in or whatever it is, and you got to start doing these things that's a white belt. But every single day, you can make the decision to do the things that you're a purple belt. So you can continue to just and that's where you're naturally going to be drawn, because that's where you're
Yeah.
good at. That's where you're comfortable. That's
That's a
what you
great analogy.
know. And you have to kind of go through. You have to jump on. And by the way, like, you're gonna be like worse than some other people at it, right? And so you're great at this one thing. You're held in high esteem from it, and in order to, and there's this book, I like the title, I haven't read the book, but it's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, right? And so it's essentially kind of talking about like, hey, great, you made it to purple belt, you've got to go be a what, and you can kind of think of it as martial art. Maybe you're like a black belt in taekwondo, but you go to jiu-jitsu, you're going to get your butt whooped, right? And same thing vice versa. Do you have the humility to go through that process of going down to be a white belt in leadership or whatever it is, and work your way up through those trenches again? And doing that when you're 25 is hard. Doing it when you're 30 is harder. Doing it when you're 35 is even harder. And
Yep.
it only gets harder as you go on. But like, realizing like, okay, even though I have certain skills that I'm very developed in, this area over here, I'm weak in, and I got to put time in over there. It's just been a useful kind of
That's a
frame
great
for me.
analogy.
So, yeah, last question for you on the book. I'm guessing there's some, so I'll ask it in a way with that assumption. What what's the top 1 or 2 chapters that did not make it to the book?
That's very interesting. You know what? I don't, I think, thank you for that question, because I might want to put one in. I spent so much time on the table of contents and editing. I can't even, in my acknowledgments, I put my wife in there, and I kind of put something funny, because she must have wondered at some point, will it ever be done? She had seen me complete books, but she saw the stuff on the dining room table. I was so focused on the table of contents, and I wanted an index, and that takes time, and that might cost you some money, because I wanted the reader who picks up my book to either go to the table of contents or go to the index and search something and say, that's what I'm looking for. So my answer to your question is, because I was working consistently on the index once I established a table of contents, and because I had 5 readers, including at least 3 that were aspiring, developing, and emerging leaders, I think they fit into that category. The other 2 were a little bit more seasoned. I got some, coach, you didn't put anything in about fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little surprised, right? So I think looking for feedback before I published, there's probably some things in there. Vulnerability, I didn't say a lot about vulnerability, but I think I brought it into one of the topics. Like, I think, to answer your question, I was interested in your question. I wanted to be sure that I really had all the topics that I really wanted to put in there. And so far, I haven't come up with like something. It's going to come from feedback from someone where I'm like, whoa, I missed that one. That would have fit beautiful in chapter 7, or that would have been great in chapter 2. I haven't really got one, but part of it is I can't even begin to tell you how much editing I did on this book. I think it was 9 months, and at the end, I won't get into the proof stuff. I had some great professionals who worked with me, and you need that. But literally reading every word aloud, but looking just for certain things, you know,
Mm-hmm.
certain words or certain thing, or too many of the same word or whatever. So I haven't found one yet. Give me the top 3 that you think I missed, because
Well,
then it makes this whole thing worth it for me, because I'm gonna have to find a way to put them in there. What did I miss?
that's it's a good hard question. You know, one of the things I think about when you, how do I explain it? there's whenever you write something about leadership, and I've barely just started walking down the path of trying to write. First off, for those listening, once you try to write, you realize how your thoughts are not actually tied together in any way.
Yeah.
You try to like taking the time to try to connect the dots is very difficult. Um, but there's for me, I would say it's probably more of everything is touched on the books. The tough part is like how do you define the chapters, and then what do you put the main focus on the chapters on, right? And so what I would say is well, one, I would say the four, like defining the four core values, because I know you've got stories behind those and
Yep.
like ways to go about defining those. Um, I think that would be interesting because I would think like loyalty was one of yours, and it's like
Yeah.
okay, like I know you touched on it in the book. There's stories that incorporate it. Is it the focus of a chapter? No. So
But
really, like how?
you know where it would fit? I mean, and maybe it's in there, but you're right. I don't think I got deep under chapter one, under foundational qualities that would fit beautifully there. I could
Yeah,
expand that part easily with those four things.
yeah. It's one of those things. Is that there's always I think the kernel of everything is throughout the book. Humility is another one, right? Where I think that's the like if I had to pick one kind of trait for leader, like what's the most foundational like humility is on, and you talk about that a lot. The challenge is just like how do you lay out the chapters and what
Yep.
chapters you really hit the words on. But I think those like from the most simple perspective, I think those four core values, the fact that they're your core values and you listed them the way you did, I think that I bet there's some stories in the book that touch on it, and I think there's probably even more
Oh
uh,
yeah. Oh,
it
there's
more intimate
lots of stories.
stories with you that has defined those to be your four and expanding on
I
those.
appreciate that that feedback makes me feel good. Hey, I love to get feedback, but like it's resonating with me. If I went back and looked at my drafts, it'd be interesting to see how those float in, where they float in. But I want to encourage you about something, and this might surprise you. I did not write this book in this order. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and it was all over the place. So I didn't have chapters assigned. It was topics. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
had begin with the end in mind, so I had a vision one. Gap leadership is something I've loved that concept, so I was working on that. I did not write this book in this order. And one of the major uh, editing pieces was when I had written a lot, and it wasn't I knew I had to do some organization. That's when I went to work on the table of contents and the cutting and pasting literally, the redundancy I bumped into. Oh my gosh. But it but but it started coming together because I had the fourth I had below, behind, above, and ahead. What
Mm-hmm.
fits in ahead? What fits in behind, right? So it I moved stuff pretty well, and of course, all along I knew I had those four things. So I might have been writing in four sections, but even some of the stuff in sections moved. Crisis management was one I debated on that moved from later in the book to earlier in the book. I at one point the same words were in both parts of the book until I
Mm-hmm.
figured I'm like, oh wow, I think I already read that. Like, so I want to encourage you, just write, but expect to spend a ton of time organizing the book and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Be okay with that, and because that is kind of how this one came together. Um,
Well, and that's the challenge, right? And I would say props to you for even just having the guts to take a stab at making a framework takes guts. Because he said, I mean, it's
yeah,
if leadership was simple, there'd be one book on it, and we would all have it
right.
figured out, and
Good point.
it would be done, right? And so that's the challenge: is how do you take these million different things and actually bring it together where hey there is a start, there is an end, and there's some closure on those ideas, right? And I think that's where for me that's and I kind of touched on it when before I started writing. I thought I understood things a whole lot better than I did, and I thought I could articulate things a whole lot better than I could. and you kind of start the writing process. I mean, even if you just take a single instance, you sit down in the morning, you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to write about. And you have this crystal clear, articulate idea of like, okay, this is what, this is the story from my life. This is the lesson that I learned from it. And then you start writing, and it's like, all of like, you thought it was this glorious idea that was totally articulate, that made sense. And then you see it on the paper and you're like, goodness gracious, did like a third grader write this? Because this makes no sense. And there's no closure on the topic. And that's just for one 1,000 word, 500,000 word essay. And now you expand that into trying to talk about this entire topic that is leadership, which, by the way, another important thing that I've kind of learned is that people use different words for different things. So a lot of people, like, how they define leadership is going to be different, right? And so how do you take this entire topic and subject and actually bring that into a framework that is retainable and makes sense? I mean, that's a huge undertaking in its own.
I would never have been. I've been writing and journaling forever. I was an English minor. I don't know if Springfield College ever had a PE major with an English minor. Like I always enjoyed writing. My first book came with a copy editor. More people should write. More people should write books. All they need to do in early stages is to pay a copy editor. They're skillful, and they take all of your writing and they make the writing so much better. And then you start to gain confidence in your writing. But a copy editor, in my opinion, is worth their weight in gold. And I had a fantastic one. That came with volleyball fundamentals, because I was an author for hire. The book was laid out. I was content. They had a copy editor. She was amazing. I worked with her. I did 2 editions of that book. So then when I did the William G. Morgan book, I hired a copy editor, somebody local, and that I found, and there was some connection personally to find this person, and she had done this before she kind of changed careers. She was a professional copy editor. Wow. And man, she just shaped things up. She challenged my thinking. And a copy editor leaves you some room. Like when you're dogmatic about something, no, I want that sentence to say it that way. Right? That might just be a style thing now and then. But at least you've had someone say, that's not the best way to write that sentence. I know. I'm kind of being a wise guy. I'm doing it for effect, or I'm trying to be humorous. Like I appreciated the fact that they let me know that the writing for that could have been better. And most of the time you take their advice, but every now and then you've got a creative idea that you want to, and I had a few of those in there. And this time around, I used a manuscript advisor who clearly did some copy editing, but not word for word throughout. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was a really smart move because I was organizing things. So there's people out there who are well worth hiring to make our writing better.
That's awesome. Well, Coach D, thank you for your time today. Thank you for writing the book, and thank you for caring about all the emerging leaders out there.
Thank you for having me, Petty. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.